Nobody has the answer to what's happening right now. Every different perspective out there. There's so many different creators and influencers like having important conversations, but like this is our first go at this kind of, this round of the world. So nobody really knows what is happening. And anyone that is promising you a simple answer is trying to cult you or con you.
Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our minds before we go too mad to find them.
Oh my!
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
Okay, you talk if you haven't got a brain.
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
How would you know if you're in a cult? Maybe it sounds like a dumb question, but if a cult is designed to make you believe you couldn't possibly be in one, how would you ever find out? Our guest today has a checklist, and fair warning, you might not like your score. Welcome back to Mad. I'm Jocelyn Brady.
I'm Sean Anthony Guillory.
And our guest today was born into one of the most notorious sex cults in history, escaped at 15, and went on to become a U.S. Army intelligence officer and one of the first women in Army history to serve in ground combat. She now has a Harvard degree in organizational psychology and co-authored The Culting of America, a book that asks a dangerous question. What if we're all in a cult and America is built to keep us there? Please welcome the knitting cult lady, Daniella Mestyanek Young.
Thank you so much for having me. And the first thing I'm going to point out is it's not the knitting cult lady, because the is culty.
Oh, got it.
yes.
Oh, I'm already failing the checklist.
Wonderful
Yeah.
call out.
Okay, knitting cult lady. Good call out.
All in good
Yeah.
fun.
Your origin story makes Hollywood thrillers look tame. You were born into the Children of God, third generation, right? And for people who haven't heard this story, can you give us the trailer?
Born third generation in the Children of God in the Philippines as the Marcos regime is falling. The Marcos regime, which the Children of God wrote a marching song for that was played on the radio every hour, and to a 15-year-old mother. And my father is older than my grandfather. So my grandfather joined the Children of God in the 70s, right? Peace, faith, love. We just love Jesus and we're going to tell the world about it. And hey, we have this prophet. My mom was one of the first children born into it as the leader. I don't say developed more and more of his craziness. It's just they come out with it more and more to their followers and they go along a little bit at a time. And, by the time my mother was 13, she was being married off to the 75-year-old prophet in a ceremony with 14 other girls ranging from the ages of 3 to 14. And the 3-year-old's mother was running the ceremony. So, Children of God has become this definite horror story, and for reasonable purposes. By the time my mom is 14, she is pregnant by her dad's boss, who's the man who runs all of the finances. And so I come into the world also as proof of their crimes, right? Like now proof to the outside world that we have been abusing girls, and this led to a lot of changes and to a lot of also splintering around the world.
I mean, if you're born into something like that, at what point do you realize what it is? Like, how do you start to see the water you're in?
I have two answers to that. Most of us don't realize we're in a cult till after we have left a cult. And that would end up being true for me. But you realize you're in a group, right? Because the whole, part 7 on my checklist is us versus them, right? So the whole time I'm growing up, we are the family, right? They stopped calling themselves the Children of God after they got famous as a sex cult. And they basically rebranded as a entertainment agency that trafficked us around the world as little performing children. right? So I have been performing for cameras and audiences around the world since I was 1 year old. There's a really crazy video of me on YouTube and 6 other white children rapping apocalypse Bible verses in downtown Rio.
Wow.
And now I've written a cult baby musical, veterans included. But performance is really brilliant for trafficking children, because when you see singing, dancing children in multiple languages too, you don't stop and ask, like, are they okay? Are they being cared for? Are they being paid? And are they happy? So all this to say, I knew I was growing up in something that was different, right? We were the family. Everyone outside was the systemites. We are God's army. We are special. That is the number one promise of cults. We are special, and you are special as part of us. When I was 6 years old, I had a really, really bad traumatic interview with a pedophile, which I have written about in Uncultured, my first book. And it was so bad, right? The punishment, that this is in the name of love, the essentially sexual abuse and torture, that right then and there, I was like, I don't care. Like, I don't care if you're going to hell if you don't grow up in the family. Like, hell's gonna suck. So I was on my way out. I think I was just a neurodivergent atheist born to religious extremists, and I was trying to get out the whole time. But it wasn't until I'm kicked out at 15, so I'm 17 in high school, and I hear this name that I never thought I would hear again, Davidito, and it's the founder's son who had done a murder-suicide, who was, poor dude was the object of this basically how-to book on pedophilia as he was raised. And, so I'm standing there, like, trying to understand what the news is saying. And he had killed one of his abusers and then taken his own life. And what I'm hearing is them saying, children of God cult, children of God cult, children of God cult. And I'm standing there and I'm going, oh, I grew up in a cult. That's what's wrong with me, right? Because I've spent 2 years trying to fit into this world that I have no clue how to be in. And being like, oh, I grew up in a cult. And then my very next thought was, well, no wonder we talk so much about how we weren't a cult.
And then,
Wow.
so from that, you escape a cult and then head into the military.
Yeah. So I just want to stop here and say I've developed a 3-part model for leaving a cult, right? And only the first part is leaving, right? Like having the crack in the brainwashing and then physically and mentally leaving. Then you have a decade of deconstruction, which starts when you start it. And then you have moving forward with new models. And we can get back to both of those 2 things later. But I was quite determined that I was fine. And I was not going to deconstruct anything. Not that I knew deconstruction was a thing. But I was fine. I was super smart, spoke 3 languages, put myself through 4 years of high school and 2, put myself through college by myself, working all the jobs, graduated valedictorian, and went into the Army. In part because I also fell into what I now think of as a 1-1 cult, a very crazy relationship. And we got married, he joined the Army, and I was like, well, I guess I'll do it too. And, looking back now, knowing what I know, I see that, first of all, I put myself in a high control environment in high school and college, just work and school and good grades. And because it didn't leave me time to think about anything, and I was so scared of going off the rails in the opposite extreme with my freedom and like losing it all, being addicted to drugs, all the things they've told you inside the cult that will happen to you when you don't fit in the world. But the reason you don't fit in the world is because they made you not fit in the world. So yeah, then I ended up in the Army at the age of 22.
And you had I think you were talking about it in multiple places. By the way, everyone check out her books and your Instagram, all the interviews. They're always wonderful.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. And you look around the military at one point and you're like, I've seen this movie before. Can I start seeing the patterns?
First day. So
First day.
Moment. Okay, so first of all, there is a week of basic training. The first week they have you, right? And the first thing they say to you, we don't care what your recruiter said. we own you now, right? As you are thrown into a week called reception, the same thing they call it in prison, where nobody's explaining anything to you. You're just standing in line. You're being inspected. You're being printed. You're being given shots. You're being photographed, right? You're becoming kind of systematically dehumanized and made into a member of the machine, right? And this week ends as you are given your uniforms and your boots to dress like a soldier for the first time, and you put all the rest of your gear in this duffel bag, and then you get on a bus and you go off to basic training. As soon as the bus comes to a stop, they start yelling, go, 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 blah, 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 right? Get out, get in a formation. You kind of know what a formation is. Get that bag into the air. And then there proceeds to be a very dramatic 2 to 3 hours. They've always made it raining or super hot, where you're going to hold this bag in the air for 2 to 3 hours while they yell at you and make you do push-ups above your head. Yeah. Wow. And there's 2 very important things about this exercise, right? Is that it is impossible, right? Nobody can do it. And it's irrational, right? I'm willing to bet none of your listeners, unless they've been in the military, have gone outside, maybe CrossFit, have gone outside and tried to hold 50 pounds in the air for 2 or 3 hours, right? And it's the irrational part that's really, really important. This is the first moment of brainwashing. And there are studies that show that the first time we do a completely wacky thing, a completely irrational thing, in order to be a member of a group, think of fraternity pledging, right? Sorority pledging. We are more likely to do future irrational things and to not question. And sure enough, that's everyone's moment, right? That either you go to your barracks that night and you're either in, or you're like, hey, Drill Sergeant, I'm thinking of taking my life. Please send me home, right? Or you're out. And they literally call it failure to adapt when they put you out of the military, because essentially they couldn't break you. So in my first moment, I recognized it, right? In holding that duffel bag of the air. And I was like, and this is the prologue of my first book, where I go, oh, I've just joined another cult. And honestly, my next thought was, well, I'm going to be better at it than the rest of these suckers, right? Because I already know what to do. And I think maybe I've actually missed this a little bit, being in school and being alone. And now all of a sudden I have a team, I have a structure, I have a mission, right? And all I got to do is suck it up and work hard. I've been doing that since I was born.
It's a new kind of performance.
Yep. One of the major themes in my musical performance is performance, and how cults are always performing, and how so much of that is true in the military too. And, they say in the Army, all you got to do to be successful is be in the right place, in the right time, in the right uniform, and never volunteer for anything, right? Don't stand out. And we actually use the phrase, drink the Kool-Aid, whenever it's we're going to do something really, really silly. But we're all going to do it. And it's literally you just got to play the game. You just got to play the game. And, that's when I started thinking a lot about cults.
When did you know you were going to write a book about it?
So it's 2018, and I had come out of the Army, started a family. I tried to go into corporate America. I was like, what? No.
Another cult.
And yeah, I was trying to figure out my own thing. And I was, literally barefoot in my kitchen, and I listened to this book called Educated. And it's not called a cult book, but it's definitely a cult book. And it was the memoir of the year, had sold 4 million copies. And I said, damn, why didn't I write that story first? And then I was like, no, I'm going to write the next one. And then I set out to do it. But at the same time, I was like, I think, this is 2018, and there is, in my opinion, a cult leader running America. And I really need to get this book out fast. And so I made a military plan, and I set about, and I did it. But, there was another moment, which was in 2020, and I was already fully involved in writing the book, but I wouldn't say I was 100% sure I was going to blow up my life, which is what happens when you write a memoir. And then we heard that this woman in the military, who was a low-ranking Mexican-American woman, Vanessa Guillen, had gone missing. Nobody had looked for her for 60 days until her family went to Congress and demanded they produce her. And then they very quickly found her body in 3 shallow graves. And this was the military women's kind of like Me Too moment. And it was literally hashtag I am Vanessa Guillen. And this was the first time I ever went viral on social media when I was like, it's every woman veteran I know. Every woman veteran I know has a story. And by the way, if a rifle goes missing for 60 minutes, they will shut down the entire base. And everybody in that base, from general to private, they call Hands Across America until they find that. Right? So it was this symbol in the moment of like, women, you matter less than a rifle. And so in that moment, I had 2 thoughts. I said, one, they would have looked for me when straight presenting white captain comes across as missing, right? The system prioritizes me more. And I'm from a literal sex cult. No one was coming for me. But I knew that. And also I had been on several rounds with publishers trying to publish this book, which was half about growing up in a cult and half about being a woman in the military. And I had gotten a bunch of rejections that said, we don't do Children of God because the abuse is too horrible. And that said, we don't do books about women in the military because nobody reads them. I think because maybe subconsciously we expect that the abuse is going to be too horrible, right? And so I thought to myself, somebody needs to get just a big enough book deal that they can stand in the shadow of the Pentagon and bleed their soul onto the page and tell America what it's like when the daughters of America disappear behind the high commune walls of the Department of Defense. And then 1 second later, I said, oh no, that's me. Yeah. So anyway, that was my first book. Yeah. And I did it, I think these days, the way I describe Uncultured is it's my story of growing up in a cult and then going into the cult of the US Army. And, I was one of the first women on a mixed gender combat team. I'm very, very proud of that. And you see that moment in the book, and you also see what women bring to the team as women in the book. But you also see me being pulled aside and told to watch my back against 25 armed American soldiers that are supposed to have my back in a firefight. And I just think all of those parts of that story are like super important. So I put it all in there.
This also makes me think about what's going on right now with Department of Defense, Department of War, and what do we lose when we, go toward, it's this for men, manly men, strong men, and kind of taking, de-diversifying, if you will.
It's so crazy to me that this guy is like, Pete Hegseth is like the 1% of the 1% dude bro in the military who's like never listened to a perspective in his life that's not from a straight white man, and like truly believes that he's going to like make it better, and truly believed that he was going to lecture that room full of generals about wokeness with a face full of makeup, and they were going to like appreciate him taking DEI away from, but the thing is, when a group of people can't do something, you don't have to make rules and regulations to keep them out of it, right? And so obviously, I say we spent 243 years arguing about whether women could be men, right? Meanwhile, this whole time, women have been fighting and dying for our country in every conflict since the Revolutionary War. But this whole time we're arguing about, can women be men? And it turns out, I have this story in Uncultured where we go into a village and the men see that the sand looks funny, which I would not have noticed in a million years. And I see that there are no children anywhere, which they would not have noticed in a million years. And together we figure out how not to die in the bomb that's in our path, right? And also maybe me with a little cultural appreciation of growing up outside the US and knowing how to not dehumanize brown people, and understanding that they love their children. So if they know there's a bomb there, they're not going to let their children come out and play, but at every turn, people say to me sometimes, Daniella, the military is not your social proving ground. Actually, At every turn, the military, because interaction can be forced, has been ahead of the curve, right? The military desegregated first. And then we learn that those people bring what that group of people brings to the table, and it's great. And we don't actually need me to be able to pull a 300-pound guy out of combat, because also that 300-pound guy can pick me up and throw me over a gate really easily, and then I can open the gate, right? Like, different people bring different skills. And so, like, but they've had 10 years, right? I was doing these patrols in 2011. It is now 2026. These women have been fully integrated since 2026, doing their thing and proving that they're awesome. Same thing with the trans ban coming down. And I was so proud of the military when the general reaction to Trump kicking them out the first time was like, what are you talking about? They're soldiers. They're doing their job. So, the effect is obviously horrible for all of the people who are not straight white men in the military right now. And it's getting more dangerous for them. And it's allowing the hatred to flourish. But also, everybody hates that guy. And everybody is dragging their heels and not going along with him. And one dude can't change the culture of an organization that quickly. And the military has already embraced DEI as the way to do war. And I also just have to say, if they try to draft Gen Z will be like, I'm sorry, sir, I'm feeling like a they today. Can I go home now?
But you bring up excellent points in terms of, even if folks aren't looking at diversity and inclusion as a nice to have, or like in a moral sort of way, as in like we should be doing this, you bring up the good points where if you just want to be a better analytical force, have more kind of things that you can offer and like look at and consider on the table, you're going to want to diversify as much as possible. And so it's just further cutting off at the knees.
I truly believe these generals thought it was an experiment that was going to fail quickly, right? You're going to get a pretty blonde lieutenant killed, and then America's not going to have the stomach for this anymore, and we already know they can't do it. And then that lieutenant did get killed. Her name was First Lieutenant Ashley White. And like, we had already proven in those 2 months what we brought to the table, like every time, right? We also can run marathons without our uteruses falling out. And it turns out we run more than men do, like, and it just is like that every time. So it's so interesting to watch this, but it's like they're trying to turn back time, and you can't do that.
Yeah, that's like I want to get into the cultiness spectrum, which, I mean, chef's kiss to that name, and shout out to Colbert for that vibe. But you talk about that. That's your second book, right? The Culting of America. And I'm curious, how many boxes do we need to check before we should be concerned? How did you develop this spectrum? Like, what are the signs that you people can start to recognize to even see that they're in something like this?
Yeah, so the first thing I did is I read every single thing out there on cults and wrote my own book and contextualized my own experience. And then I kind of went off on my own and was like, okay, what is my definition of a cult? Like, what are the things I think you need to have, right? And I came up with this one. And that was also when I immediately realized, no, the military actually does fit every single one. And I think knowing that helps us, right? It helps us in a lot of ways. And I say, these are, I made my own model because I'm the first organizational psychologist in the game doing this. And I wanted to have a group behavior lens. So these are 10 tools of group behavior, and they're tools, right? You can have all of them, but it's how they're being used. But 2 of them are strictly not good, one being exploitation of labor and one being constant self-sacrifice of members. And but people say, how many do you need to be a cult? in my opinion, 10. I just think a lot more groups in America fit all 10 than people are ready to grapple with. So you need to have all 10, and they're in the order that they're in because they all hook together, because they come together like that. And it's a pattern, and we can track and we can see this in basically all cults. However, if you brought me into your company to help you diagnose your toxic culture and you have 5 of them, those 5 are where I'm going to look. Right. And also, the thing that people, I would say, have some heartburn with my work about, so one chapter is having a distinguishable vernacular, right? Having your own language that inside of your group means something, right? If I call you all systemites, that doesn't mean anything. But in the children of God, whoa, that is all you dirty outsiders, right? And I think, by the way, Uncultured is the first book about the military written in non-military language. Just going to ape Donald Trump here a little bit and hold my book upside down.
That gets 5 stars from Jocelyn right there.
Right.
Yeah.
So because I'm writing to a civilian audience, had to translate the military language into civilian language so that you can actually understand what's going on. So having your own distinguishable vernacular is all these parts of brainwashing, because it's just getting loaded language, getting you thought-stopping techniques, how to stop asking questions. But it's also part of isolating you, right? It's also part of getting you not to understand when things are going wrong because you don't have the language for it, right? So there are all of these things. And so people say, okay, what about medicine? What about engineering? And what they really want me to do, and what I feel like call experts in the past have done, have been like, oh no, well, that's okay, because see here, like, you go home at night. And what I just say is, yeah, you're more isolated. In medicine, in engineering, you're more isolated because of your distinguishable vernacular. It's harder for you to describe your experiences. Engineers trying to talk to regular people. I mean, we've all met them, right? I lived in Seattle. It's the same trouble veterans have trying to explain their experience to the outside, and cult survivors have, because you don't have the regular world's descriptive language for it. So there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to be on guard more. If you're a doctor or an engineer, you're just in a field that isolates you more. And that with it comes all these things about the distinguishable vernacular. And you probably really want to look at that chapter.
Yeah, and I do apologize if this is in any of the books or whatnot what I'm about to ask. Is there an example of, and again, I almost feel like I'm going to fall into my own trap if I say an organization that has like a 0 out of 10 on that. But I almost feel like, again, if it's an organization,
well, right,
by almost definition, it's probably going to fit in the one. Yeah.
So I called it the Cultiness Spectrum, but at the end of the book, I'm kind of like, yeah, but the spectrum is groups, right? There's no like divide where you stop being a regular group and you start being a cult, right? And the thing I found is that we're always going to argue about the definition of cult. And there's actually one entity that defines cult, and it's the media. And it's only done when we can measure the damage in bodies, right? When we have branded women or burned children, or all these pregnant teenagers being taken out of Texas, right? And so I said, first of all, nobody argues with me about whether the Children of God was a cult or not. And so I'm going to do the military intelligence officer thing, being the expert on the bad guys, which is to go, we call left of the boom. There's some internal vernacular, right?
Yes.
But like before the bad thing happens, we're going to try to get you to see that the bad thing is happening. And that's why I've been doing this work since 2015, because I've been trying to get the American public to see that the bad thing is happening. And it can be hard to get people to take you seriously. But also one of the things for me with my book and my work is groups don't like it when you actually tell them they're just full of shit. And they certainly don't want to pay you necessarily to do it. But individuals, I decided to bet that there are as many individuals out there that have had bad leaders, bad group experiences, bad relationships, or maybe even grew up in a single family cult that can like learn a lot from these things. You know, I have a song in my musical called Call It What You Want To, Call It What You Want To. But like,
There you
if you're
go.
having these problems, or I like to say, you know, if you're hearing the stories from a woman who grew up in one of the world's worst cults and you're relating, then yes, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. As in, like, even if there was an organization you assessed it and they only had like one or two that was on the checklist, the organization should be treating those as, okay, here's the vulnerabilities that folks could absolutely exploit. How do we shore up that or mitigate that, even if we can't totally take it out? So I think in terms of that kind of assessment, again, it's a beautiful thing.
John, were you in the military?
And both my parents, they're probably listening. They were over 20 years in the military, so I'm a brat, and I've done a lot of work
Yeah.
in terms of like military and national security. But again, I've never been in it
And this
myself.
is
But
my
yeah, like as a
thing, right?
contractor.
Like in the military, my job, I worked with pilots, right? I was intelligence officer for pilots. So my job is to like look these
Yeah.
pilots in the face and be like, oh, you think your plan is really good? Okay. Well, if I was the bad guy, I would try to kill you here, here, and here with these weapons. And oh, now, by the way, go fly, you know? And because the whole point is you have to think about what if it doesn't work that way, right? What if these, like the way you,
Mhm.
these are your vulnerable points? And knowing that helps you build a better culture. And yet everybody at my
Absolutely.
master's degree was like, Daniella, what do you mean you study bad groups? And I was like, but y'all are just assuming all the companies you're going to go work for are the good guys.
Which, especially the past few years, I think people have, if they did believe such, that
Oh,
these companies are
Oh,
always
man.
for the good of
You
the
guys
people.
seen this-
Everybody's-
That's really
a lot of people are waking up now.
Yeah, what do you
There's a lot of
what do
waking
you
up.
credit that
Yeah, go
to?
on.
Like what's happening that we're all kind of
Great question.
I mean, this is almost like the end of the Civil War and then the end of the civil rights movement, but with data and information, right? So we had these popular movements, then the figurehead at the top was assassinated and replaced with a racist civil rights movement or civil war, right? And we swung the opposite way. And then kind of similarly in the civil rights movement, right? The two people arguably leading it, JFK and MLK, are assassinated and replaced with a racist who grudgingly did the right things at the end. And we swung the other way. And now it's again like we are in this swing back, right? Like so much of this, even though this has been in the works for 100 years, but also so much of this is in reaction to we had a Black president. And that allowed so much fear and rage and hatred. And, you know, I'm from the cults of the 60s and 70s that were a response to desegregation. And it was literally white people saying, I'm going to take my children and go home. Us versus them. Right. And so it's like, you know, I just see it's like everything is so out in the open now. Right. I mean, the president of the United States posted a video of a former president as an ape on the White House page. And so it is just kind of, you know, we're in the bad place. Everybody is realizing now.
A bad place.
And I think, you know, first of all, they're not going to win. They're really bad at it right now, and humans don't generally just go backwards or live under oppression for that long. But I think it's like maybe going to give us the opportunity to just like have a lot of these discussions, have things out in the open and figure out where the, you know, like both sides have gotten so polarized that we're not even sharing the same reality anymore. And we're going to have to figure out how to come back together and have conversations and what we're going to do about all of these wounds that have been opened up.
Well, something that's actually timely and hopefully as soon as we could get this episode out, I'm not sure when it's going to be out, but something that's a little more timely. You are getting some of these previous like MAGA backer kind of like media figures who are coming out now, like Tucker Carlson the last week. There's a couple of other folks who were just like, yeah, we made a total mistake in terms of backing him.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned that in terms of, again, like this context of cult. I'm not even saying like, okay, it's genuine, we
No,
should
it's
just love in
so
the fold. So, but in terms of the steps for folks who are like, oh, okay, I was
yeah.
totally mystified by
So
this guy.
I
Yeah, I'd love
say I
to
have
hear
two
your thoughts,
responses to that. I'm sorry, I'm two response lady
please.
today. I don't know if it will surprise
That's
you
all
to know I'm a
good.
Gemini, but I actually just made a video about this about Tucker Carlson, where
Oh,
if I'm speaking as an expert, yes, it's when people leave cults, if they have a safe place to land and to question and to do that decade of deconstruction, great. I even made a workbook to help guide you. First of its
ooh,
kind,
let
right?
people
You
know.
can get this on my website,
No.
knittingcultlady.com. But now you asked me as a victim of cults, right? So this person just posted on my thing and they said, I was an adult joiner in FGA. We call them first generation adult, the children of God. I was in it for a long time. And he was making, or she was making the thing to Tucker Carlson. And, it's hard to leave a cult. And I'm like, yes, it is. It was also hard to be abused in that cult. But I don't forgive you just for leaving a cult. Like you're not forgiven. I forgive you when you make an unmitigated apology, when you make your best attempts to make amends, and then when you're here, when those FGAs, first generation adults, cult joiners, are able to deconstruct enough that they're here helping us fight against the cult. That's when I forgive you. So, to the listeners, it's like if you can be the person that holds space for Tucker Carlson, great, please do that. But I don't forgive you until I see you fighting back against the thing that you ushered in, and certainly not silencing people or using their tactics, the cult tactics, to build your own brand.
What do you see if like there's a lot of people who believe, my uncle's in a cult, my dad's in a cult, etc. And then each side of the aisle pointing fingers and saying, "No, you're in a cult. No, you're in a cult." What do you say to that?
Yeah.
Can't both
The
be right.
first thing I say is telling people they're in a cult is not helpful ever. It's its own thought stopping cliche. The only time I say you use the C word is if you have a friend who's maybe thinking about joining an MLM. If you can say, hey, do you know that the cult gal is saying that these are commercial cults? Maybe.
They'll
But like
sell
by the
essential
time,
oils.
yeah. But by the time
Amway. Yeah.
you've got into like you're in a cult, you're just using that as a shutdown, and it's funny how often I get it. People don't like that I've turned my critical thing on their group. So now they're like, now you're a cult leader. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't even know how to define cult leader. And so, um, you know, but look, we are in a absolutely binary, polarized political process and world right now. And anything binary is culty. Like that is what cults are built on. We in my audience are trying to get people to stop using black and white thinking. But a binary process, only two, you're in or out, you're left or right? You're either blue no matter who, or you're MAGA, like that is culty, right? And and this is where I think like my book is helpful. Like I don't think both sides are the same. First of all, one side has a clear leader and one side doesn't have a leader to save their life, not a person or an idea, right? On the left. Like where are the leaders? But like the left is doing all this purity testing right now, which is a tool of cults. And so this is why I come from like one of the worst, most famously named cults to be like, I don't actually care what you call it. I have given you a tactics book, right? This is how the tactics of control work. And if you can figure out those tactics, that's kind of like what deconstruction is. You're figuring out how that worked on you, and then you're not falling for it in the future. And you're able to like, so one thing cult people do, they'll leave a cult and then they'll just go find another cult because it's still feeding all of those in or out purity requirements, passion for the mission, like all of these things that they wanted. And so you're not moving forward with new models. You're just like picking something, and going with it.
Can you go back to that? You've used that term a couple of times. I think it's really important. The thought stopping cliches. What are some examples that people can see, like spot in their everyday lives, and how can they respond to them?
Yeah, so my favorite example is boys will be boys. Um, I think when we're talking about the military, thank you for your service. I think that's a thought stopping cliche, because you don't have to ask a veteran how they feel about their service, how they feel about the wars they fought in, the fact that we all as civilians have to support veterans, right? It's just an easy, oh, you said a hard thing. You've been to war. Thank you for your service. And then we don't go any further. And so what brainwashing really is at its core is just getting you not to question, right? To do things unquestioningly. And people think that makes you a robot automaton, and it doesn't, right? And that people's outside opinion of that is the best thing going for cults, because all they have to do is show you a snippy, snappy 12-year-old who knows her Bible verses, and you're going to be like, oh, well, that's not a cult. They want to be there, That's not my idea of brainwashing, but it's just getting you to stop asking questions. And the Mormons, I think, have taught the world that you don't even have to be isolated on a commune. If you just get your people to not go there in their minds, they can be anywhere in the world, and they're still going to wear their magic underwear and not drink coffee and believe in their thing, right? And so so the thought stopping cliche is just these terms, right? So in the Children of God, we had trust the prophet, right? In the military, we literally have drink the Kool-Aid. Yes, this is stupid that we're moving these rocks from here to here, and then we're going to move them back. And we don't want you to focus on the fact that that's busyness for the sake of busyness so we can keep your mind overloaded and control you. We just want you to drink the Kool-Aid, get the program. So but it's really any phrase that gets you to stop questioning. So the Mormons have put it on a shelf. You ask a hard question and they say, put it on a shelf. So now the ex-Mormon community has the analogy of the shelf breaking. Eventually you just put everything on the shelf, and finally there's one thing, and it in of itself seems like a nothing, but it's like the straw that broke the camel's back.
If you've talked about your books or your talks where this like model that we almost could like aspire to, that gets us, will there ever be something where it's like purely, okay, this is like the anti-cult, this has nothing to do with it, it's probably something to aim for, but it sounds like it's something where an openness and an encouragement of critical thinking is one. Two is something in terms of knowing and understanding that there are differences in people, and not only accepting that, but see how in terms of a situation that can absolutely be advantageous to whatever the question is. Are there other, and again, like, I don't even know if you agree with those two, but are there others that you're like, okay, here's how we get to something? Because again, the bigger thing, we talk about stuff like how to deal with like mis and disinformation, and it seems to be almost hitting at that too, in terms of this accepting of critical thinking in terms of environment, and like accepting people's differences and how they can bring stuff to the table.
The questioning is very, very important. When I think of like a structure that is anti-cult, and, we haven't talked about this enough yet. Cults are not just bad groups, right? Cults very specifically are groups that are coercing and manipulating you in order to exploit your labor. The what is in order to exploit your labor. And when I tell you, I did not understand my life until I was 33 years old, and I heard cult scholar Dr. Janja Lalich say cults are all about labor. And I said, oh, we were an army of 7,000 singing, dancing children that they trafficked around the world, and we made money for them. Right. And in fact, watching the Epstein list kind of stuff, I've started to say, like, when we see people appearing to participate in their own exploitation, we call that a cult. Right. So people stop at the what, you believed what, and they don't get to the why. And the why is to exploit your labor. And so therefore, first of all, I have a very strong work value that I do not accept free labor. Like, no ex-Mormons, you cannot write for my musical for free. So I think that labor unions are in many ways the anti-cult organization, right? They are about protecting
Interesting.
individuals against labor exploitation. Now, that does not mean that they're necessarily good groups, and that does not mean that they can't hurt individuals. And I kind of think that groups can always hurt individuals because groups are stronger than individuals. And then I think systems, which are stronger than groups, and also capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, always hurt individuals who they were not made for, you know? So you can still have bad groups that are not cults because they're not exploiting labor, but there are many, 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 many groups in our society exploiting labor right now. And sometimes I just think it's a matter of choice, whether we call them a cult or a criminal organization or anything else.
This is making me think about, is this why America might be a cult? Like, is America just one giant exploitation of labor?
Well, so yeah, it's funny because conversations with me always start off people thinking they're going to hear my strange far off cult story, but then they walk away thinking like, have I been in 5 cults or 6 cults? You know? And I do. I mean, yes, one thing. So Puritans, 2 things that are very, very deeply linked to being American and also to traits that uphold white supremacy is obsession with the written word. And the Puritans were very, very obsessed with writing things down. The Puritans are our first cult, by the way. They did not come here for religious freedom. They came here for being able to force their way of thinking on one group. And we write about that in the Us versus Them chapter. And then the second thing was obsession with working hard. And this is where the Puritan work ethic comes from. And there's some like really funny, like British dude exclaiming in 1818 that America's boring because there are no interesting men to gad about in pubs with in the middle of the day because everybody's working. And so, I mean, absolutely has our like America kind of always been about, I think, exploitation of labor. This is one of the things I'm trying to get people to look at. And I think in my chapter that I called Nobody Wants to Work Hard Anymore about exploitation of labor, that maybe millennials and then definitely Gen Z are kind of buying out of the sacred assumption that working hard for the man is going to pay off for you because that is breaking, right? The American dream is sort of breaking.
Yeah, the story's falling apart. Like, can't afford mortgage, can't afford student debt. What am I doing here?
I think
These
I'm
rules
the
aren't
last
working.
generation. I think I'm the last generation of student that could work your way through college. You can't, I mean, the costs have skyrocketed, right? You can't really reasonably do that anymore.
You were saying
There's-
anyone could be susceptible, right? And looking around, am I in 5 or 6 cults? I was at the beginning of this conversation pretty certain I was not in a cult. How do I know? Humble me.
That's why the first line of a book is you might be in a cult. You know, I actually think there is a type of person that is not susceptible to a cult, right? And I think that is if you are perfectly happy with your life, right?
Mhm.
You don't want a different partner, to be better, to be sexier, to be richer. If you are perfectly happy with your life, if you are Samwise Gamgee, I don't think you are susceptible to a cult. However, I always partner that with saying, but it's always low threat. It's never no threat, right? So I don't think any individual should think they are immune from being taken in by a cult. And I hear this a lot. Well, I'm neurodivergent. I could never, or I'm this, I could never. And I'm like, okay. But what I think is anywhere in the space of personal transformation, whether that is dieting, whether that is getting a new degree, education, moving away from home, losing a loved one, spiritual, exercise, we're all going to be in spaces of personal transformation. I could just be reading a book, right? If that book was written by a cult leader, you know, just like anywhere that children are cared for, abusers will show up, and you just have to be on guard for that. Anywhere in the space of personal transformation, grifters will show up, gurus will show up, cult leaders will show up on the border of war-torn countries or in climate refugee places. You know, these are all places the children of God worked and recruited The Children of God was one of the first organizations in the door after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Just they took my dad away and sent him there. You know, and so you kind of just always have to be on your guard, you know, especially when I tell you, like, losing a loved one, you know, at any time you can be back in a space of personal transformation and someone can take advantage of you very easily.
Watch out for those supplements and meme coins. There are some benefits. We sort of touched on this, like the kind of the upsides of being in a cult and the sense of belonging that people, especially if you're talking about people who are vulnerable, they're grieving or going through a time in their life where they're questioning and really seeking answers. And that sense of belonging. If we tear down cults, what is left for people? What replaces it? That we talked about labor unions being kind of in that spectrum.
I mean, community is so important, right? And I always say, like, becoming a mom is what radicalized me. And I think that it takes a village is the most gaslighting phrase we have in America, right? Especially in white America. Like, where is my village? And I grew up in a very harmful village, but we had a village, you know? People like will ask me how I know how to do so many things. And I'm like, well, I had 50 moms, you know, and I had a lot of trauma from that, but we had a village. And, you know, we look at, you know, I really feel like the left slept on Phyllis Schlafly defeating the ERA, you know, and I make fun of evangelicals going to church 5 days a week, but they are organizing, right? And so I say all of this to say, cults give you so much more than just a worldview, right? Being in a religious community gives you so much more than just your faith. And we talk about this in our Exit Cost chapter. It gives you certainty. It gives you community. It gives you support. It gives you ritual. Chanting connects us as human beings together. It also makes us susceptible to suggestion. I'm starting to talk with some of my friends about how maybe we need to organize the ex-religious to start going after the Christian nationalists. And I'm going to start that by us getting together every Sunday morning and, like, I don't know, singing revolution songs, right? Like, there are things, or, like, you know, my mother loved the ritual of opening a book of the Bible and picking a verse and using that to set your intentions for the day. So now she has some card deck with, like, Bambis and rabbits, and it, like, gives her some positive affirmations and thoughts to set her day. And so there are all of these things that I say that cults do right. And this, in my opinion, cults kind of just go around taking what works for real community, usually from indigenous or other communities of color, and then kind of like hacking it, right? I mean, African American community can tell us all about chanting and humming and what it works for in grief and in community and all of these things. But then, like, Tony Robbins uses it to get you to sign up for more courses, you know? So I think it's, first of all, like, I am really trying to push the message that, like, white America has given up community for whiteness, and we don't know our traditions, our stories, where we come from. If you see me online, a lot of times I'm wearing these crochet collars. I call them love bomb collars. And it started for me from looking into my, like, Mexican identity, but then also Slovakian identity, and, like, weaving these things together, because what I lost from the cult was my roots, but so has much of, you know, white America. And then also, but just advancements, you know? So, like, I spend a lot of time thinking about air conditioning and how much air conditioning has changed community, you know? And I grew up in Brazil, which, as a poorer country and an equatorial country, did not respond to the invention of air conditioning by air conditioning all of inside, and certainly not freezing everything very cold. And then I moved to Texas, which did respond like that. So that was traumatizing. But, you know, I live in Maryland now, near the University of Maryland, in, like, this beautiful row of townhouses in a planned community where you can get everything you need. And there's this lovely little trail that runs outside my house. And without air conditioning, if this was 100 years ago, I would be getting off this to go sit out front for a few hours, right? Because it would be just too hot to be inside. And then because of that, we would know all of our neighbors. We would know most of the people walking around. Our kids would have a corner where kids go play, right? We haven't really had that since the 80s. And people talk about sometimes you travel in parts of Europe or Latin America, and it's so nice because you can just send the kids out to play with the other kids. And here we're still arranging play dates, So there are little things and there are huge things. But I think in so many ways, we just don't have actual community in America. And at the end of the book, two things. I say, I'm the expert on bad groups, and the people who look like me haven't been in charge of forming the good groups. So one of the things I do is pass the mic to a really great creator who I've learned a lot from. Her name is White Woman Whisperer, and she's a Black woman, and she does an amazing essay.
What a name.
Yeah. We have a podcast together called Hey White Women, where we like deconstruct white supremacy as a cult. And so she has a great book in the end as like groups versus community. Because one of the things for me toward the end of the book was I got very, very jaded. And I said, you know what? Maybe all groups are the problem. Because as soon as you define an us, you have defined a them. And I think like maybe it's part of our kind of like human disease that, assign people random sports teams and they're all, there's this organizational psychology game where we play with people where we make everyone play like rock, paper, scissors against each other. But then when you lose, you have to get on the person's team and cheer for them. And at the end of 5 minutes, your whole room is polarized and screaming against each other, right? It's actually enjoyable to do us versus them, right? So one of the answers that Rebecca has given in the community portion is like the walls of a group are defined, right? We know in a group who's in the group and who's out of the group. Whereas in a community, you can come and go, and communities can expand and contract as they need to. And also leadership in a community can really shift around, right? We all know like, yeah, there's a mayor, but then there's also so-and-so's grandma who really knows everything. And then there's this person who's really the power broker. And then there's this person who all the Gen Z watch as an influencer, right? There's all different kinds of who can be the leader on which topic in a community. And, one of the things I think about right now is like the movement right now doesn't have a leader to assassinate and replace with a racist. And so maybe we're all just going to push back together finally, or, that's too positive, but
we got Luigi. That's our new leader.
But I mean, even watching that has been so interesting, right? As a person who grew up abroad and also as a person who studies like all of this stuff. It's just like you can only control people so much. And also you can only keep people so hungry and poor. These are all things cults want to keep you. It's like, so I have 6 things, right? That cults want to keep you tired, busy, poor, hungry, skinny, and pregnant.
Woof. Ooh, skinny and pregnant at once.
And all of these things, right? We're working more, we're making less money, we got rid of Roe v. Wade, we're going back to skinny worship.
Yeah.
Busy,
spend all your money on being skinny.
Busy is a type of labor. Like busy is a type of labor, right? Like just being busy scrolling on your phone all the time, just being busy all the time doesn't allow you to think. So anyway, all of these fun little lists you get in the back of the book too. And they're just like little tools, and I'm sorry if everyone starts calling their boss a cult leader all of a sudden.
No, it's, and again, not that the audience is always clamoring to hear my voice on this, but again, I was just sitting here just listening and thinking again, like, so obviously the aspects in terms of, like looking at like, religious aspects and even some of the community aspects, but you really have me thinking hard on that economic aspect of cults a lot, and the things that kind of like are things around like the exploiting of labor.
Yeah.
And again, like when you're almost proposing it, it sounds like, again, it's a work. Well, it's a work in process. It's work that like multiple people need to come together and kind of like help construct. But what does, again, like a functioning community that minimizes, like the exploitation of, like the different groups that are a part of it, like what does that project look like? I'm hearing, it's,
and I think there's a reason that we swung back so hard after the civil rights movement. I think that the Black Panthers had something very interesting there. The groups that organize, the labor unions, all of these different things. Like, we do have some
free
models
lunches.
for how to do it. There's been a systematic going after a lot of that stuff in the years since then, and then of course just isolation has changed. So everything has changed with the information age, and I make this argument in the very beginning of the book that we actually, the world walked away from charismatic leaders after World War II. My chapter on charismatic leaders is called A Hitler and a Churchill. And we walked into bureaucracy and process and respect of law and treaty and all of this stuff. And so what happened to bring us back? And I think what happened is that we lived through an apocalypse, which was the industrial age crashing headfirst into the information age and leaving literally nothing untouched, right? When I went to spy school in 2010, the greatest disaster in the world, which I believe remains today, in front of nuclear war, is the internet going down. That kills more people, and then we start killing each other. There's only enough beer in America for one day in stores. Like, we would break down pretty fast. And so everything has changed, right? And we have this thing called algorithmic radicalization, which is our tech overlords discovered that if they feed you more extreme content, you stay on longer, right? You get angry. Like, doom scrolling is designed. And so algorithmic radicalization is going to push you in either direction you are leaning, right? If you click on a Tucker Carlson post, next thing you know, you're going to be getting Nick Fuentes, right? And if they're going to push you further to the left. And by the way, when we went to print, Facebook had said, leaked memo about this, where Facebook had said, yeah, but we're not going to do anything about that because that would be anti-growth. Yeah. Well, guess what happened last week? Last week, a woman won a lawsuit against Meta for basically doing this to her, for intentionally doing this to her, keeping her on their platform longer, causing her anxiety, and all of this stuff. And so my friend of mine was telling me about this. And then later that evening, I was scrolling on Instagram and it hit midnight. And I was traveling. That's my excuse. Okay. And it popped up this little message to say, okay, just so you know, we're going to turn your notifications off now until the morning. And you know what? Now would be a good time for you to think of closing your screen. So this is the answer of how you go after the cults and the bad groups and the things they think they can't change, is you go after their money every single time. I mean, could you imagine if we all did a class action lawsuit against Meta for algorithmic radicalization? Which we kind of could now, and they would go out of business, right? So now they're going to start they're going to start redesigning their algorithm and changing things. And so that's part of my answer. And these are all very complicated conversations, as you said, Sean, that are going to have like all kinds of people involved. And one of the things I say in the book is like, anyone promising you a simple answer is trying to cult you or con you. I knit for 12 hours a day and make one $400 jacket a week because I've been knitting for as long as Jesus was alive. There's no trick, but we're going to have to regulate the internet, or it's just going to keep doing this to us. And then like, we're having like real societal breakdowns. Oh, by the way, right out of that apocalypse rose the tech bro. who was going to lead us to. And we literally ushered charismatic leaders back in with Steve Jobs. And now it
interesting.
has just gone and gone and gone. You know, and we actually
That's
use
actually
Adam
pretty
Newman
cool.
of WeWork as our opening example of cult charismatic leader. Yeah. So
Oh, it's all coming
like
together.
any
Yeah.
like any good intelligence
it's
officer, I've mostly only helped define the problem here, and then I walk away and I say, "Haha! Now you have to think of all your answers. Here's a good workbook for you if you want a companion." And that's how we do it. And I mean, specifically in the military, the intelligence officer has no ties to again, you're set against operations. You don't have to care how angry they are that you said they're going to shoot at you in that village. You're just like, sometimes I used to just, when they would try to argue with me, and I would just be like, okay, but you're all going to die. And like my best witch voice. And then you just leave them with the problem to solve. And one of the things about intelligence, but also any kind of disaster preparation, right, is any preparation makes you more prepared for any outcome versus no preparation. So in 2012,
absolutely.
the Department of Homeland Security released official prepare for the zombie apocalypse posters, because this was the height of, Pride and Prejudice and zombies and
Walking Dead.
Yes, and they said, if we say prepare for this hurricane, nobody's going to care. But if we say prepare for the zombie apocalypse, they're going to go out and prepare for the hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
That was the best government campaign I've ever seen from our government.
I tried to get posters for my unit so badly. I was just like, but I mean, I did this with soldiers. I could not. One day I was so frustrated with myself because I could not get these 18-year-old analysts to care about the enemy situation in Afghanistan, because I couldn't get them to stop talking about World of Warcraft. And then I had maybe my most brilliant leadership idea ever. And I walked in and said, okay, build me a country brief on World of Warcraft. It will be the hardest brief you've ever done, because I know nothing about World of Warcraft. You are going to have to build the entire world and educate me on it. And I'm going to have so many questions, and you're going to have to be good. And they did their hearts out. And then at the end, we were like, okay, plug and play Afghanistan.
Wow.
Let's go.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Trick the kids by doing something fun, everyone.
I'm telling you.
Got Lego videos now. It's one of our own government couldn't figure that one out.
It's like my daughter's teacher wants me to encourage her to stop reading graphic novels and to read chapter books. And I am not going to discourage a kid from reading any reading, because I truly believe that all reading is good reading. And she's also a great graphic novelist, and who knows what that's going to be.
Very good.
When we talk about knitting, you have a fact about knitting and spycraft. It's just so very delightfully mad.
Oh, my
Could you tell
It's
our
my favorite.
listeners about this?
So this starts with understanding that knitting is Morse code, because that's a sticker that says knitting is Morse code, because knitting is binary. It's so very culty, right? You have two stitches. You have knit and purl, which is upside down knit, right? And anything binary is Morse code, right? So knitting as spycraft has been used, I mean, probably always, but it was used in World War I and World War II. And just wait, because this is not really about knitting. This is about straight white male armies underestimating women, right? Because both sides were using knitting as spies in World War I and World War II. So this technology, this fact, knitting as Morse code, was completely understood by both sides. But the straight white male militaries of both sides are so into underestimating women that they don't see that, right? And so here's how it would go today. If Pete Hegseth's military came to search me on the DC train where I'm riding with my little wicker basket with my knitting in it, right? And you come search and you see knitting needles and yarn and a pattern, and I'm actively knitting, right? And you're so busy underestimating me that not only did you not notice I could kill you with these knitting needles very, very easily, but that I don't need a pattern. that whole pattern is just a spy message. So that's why I say good luck with your knitting, or with your straight white male military, you know? Like, I don't need a military weapon to take you out. You put a crochet hook in someone's arm, you're going to need surgery. Slip knots are great for crochet, but also for handcuffs.
That's a slip knot.
And look, can I teach you all how to knit right now in 4 seconds?
Yes,
Oh,
please.
please. Yeah, I'm
So look,
all eyes and ears.
you stab him, you strangle him,
Yeah.
you scoop out his guts,
Uh-oh.
throw him off a cliff.
One down.
My kid actually made a
headspace.
little rap about launching astronauts to the moon when she was 6, and that's how she taught all her girlfriends how to knit.
Oh.
The same, just a little less violent.
Oh,
but wait,
man.
I
Yes.
said the moon, so I have to leave you with my absolute best
Go
line
on.
of the book, which is that cults always promise space travel.
Really?
This is the fun kind of expert I am, because as it goes, Donald Trump launched the Space
Awful.
Force. And I was literally just hopping around my house going, it's culty, it's culty, it's culty. Right? And I mean, it's just a heuristic that's just true. And I was like, why? You know, because the children of God had this whole thing where when you die, you go to heavenly city, and heavenly city's inside the moon, even though his dimensions didn't fit inside the moon, but then he just moved the goalposts. And obviously you have Scientology, right? You have Heaven's Gate, you have the Mormons. You promised a planet, Kolob, but then they lost their planet. I'm not clear on what they did, but they had a planet. Now they don't have a planet. And so, you know, it's not always physical space travel, although very often it is. And Donald Trump just said he was going to put Trump Tower on the moon. It's like he keeps giving me these. But metaphorical space travel, it is a unfulfillable promise. Because if the promised land was actually something we could deliver to you, we'd have to deliver it. But if it's always in a different body, in a different world, in a different life, in a different time, in a different dimension, on a different plane. Talking to single family cults, I found out that the unfulfillable promise is often a trip to Disney World. So sometimes it's Space Mountain that they're promising you.
Very good.
That is the unfulfillable promise. So we have a whole space genre with our book swag, and it's been a lot of fun.
Should I be disappointed that Elon Musk will never fulfill his promise of going to Mars?
Oh, this is one of them. This is one of my examples in the book where I say these really big promises, right? Like we just got to start being more critical of these, right? Like a 19-year-old Stanford dropout, Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos, was never going to solve a blood testing problem that had stumped the world's best blood scientists. And Elon Musk is not going to take us to Mars when the world's best scientists cannot figure out a functioning biodome. Right? And like, this is what cult leaders do. They make these huge promises that are very big, that are very vague, the transcendent mission. And it's just like, nobody has the only way. This is a great way to end. Calling yourself the anything is a cult. The Children of God changed to the family. The other the family runs the National Prayer Breakfast, right? No, there's a lot of familial language in cults, but calling yourself the anything gives you this like subconscious, we are the way, the truth, the life. We are the only ones. And even working in a coalition of the 5 like Western English speaking nations, you know, like the United States and the UK were much cultier than the Canada or the Australia or the New Zealand. And so it's like anyone, you know, all of the problems in the world are hard and complicated, and all of them are going to take a coalition of all of the minds. You know, right now I say like nobody has the answer to what's happening right now. Every different perspective out there. There's so many different creators and influencers like having important conversations, but like this is our first go at this kind of, this round of the world. So nobody really knows what is happening. And anyone that is promising you a simple answer is trying to cult you or con you.
Boom.
Yeah. What?
Daniella, knitting cult lady, not the knitting cult lady. Got it right.
There you go.
Read her books, get the workbook. What other plugs would you like to share, and how can people find you?
People can find me on their social media of choice as Knitting Cult Lady, where I'm having these conversations actively. This is an ongoing conversation. The books I write are ongoing conversations, so you can come find me for more of this. I'm just now launching my own show on your social media platform of choice every day, live from 11 to noon, where I'm talking to people and bringing in interesting guests as well. So yeah, Knitting Cult Lady.
Thanks for having your part of this ongoing conversation be on the Mad Warfare podcast. So we really appreciate it.
Mad Warfare, not
Thank you
the
so
Mad
much.
Warfare.
I've come to talk with you again. Come and be inside my head. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled, as you say. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled, as you say. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled, as you say. Cancel me, cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me.